based on events that will ruin your favorite childhood fairy tale. Number 5. The Red Shoes. The Red Shoes draws heavily on the dancing plague of 1518, a mysterious and deadly phenomenon in Strasbourg. Victims danced uncontrollably, many until their deaths. Some historians blame ergot poisoning caused by a fungus on rye bread, while others suggest psychological stress during a time of famine and despair. Karen's obsession with the red shoes mirrored society's fear of unchecked desire and vanity. The cobbler who crafted them was said to have survived the dancing plague and imbued the shoes with the energy of those lost to the curse. When Karen wore them, the shoes felt alive, tightening around her feet as if hungry. Her dancing began joyously, but quickly turned grotesque. Her legs twisted unnaturally, her skin bruising as the shoes dragged her through town. Villagers whispered that her screams were drowned out by ghostly music, faint but persistent. The shoes carried her into a cursed forest, where the shadows moved independently of the trees. In this forest she saw visions of spectral dancers, the victims of the dancing plague. Their bodies were contorted, their movements jerky, but their empty eyes locked on her. When Karen begged the woodcutter to sever her feet, his axe gleamed unnaturally. The shoes, now free, continued their dance, leaving bloody trails that never dried. Even after she escaped the shoes, Karen's nights were haunted by the faint, rhythmic tapping outside her door, a reminder that the curse was never truly gone. Number 4. Snow White. The tale of Snow White finds its roots in the story of Margaretha von Waldeck, a Bavarian noblewoman in the 16th century. Margaretha was known for her beauty, but her life was cut short by poisoning, believed to have been orchestrated by her stepmother or political rivals to prevent her marriage to a Spanish prince. In the story, the queen's mirror wasn't just a tool of vanity. In medieval lore, mirrors were thought to trap souls and reveal dark truths. This mirror, crafted by a notorious alchemist, whispered the queen's deepest fears back to her. The queen became consumed, not by beauty, but by power, willing to destroy anyone who threatened her rule. Snow White's escape mirrors real-life fears of persecution. Fleeing into the forest, she faced dangers reminiscent of medieval superstitions, wolves, bandits, and malevolent spirits. The dwarfs she encountered were not charming miners, but stunted laborers forced to work in dangerous mines, echoing the plight of children in Waldeck. The poisoned apple reflected a common fear of medieval nobility, assassination through toxic substances. The apple's red skin gleamed unnaturally, and when Snow White bit into it, her death mimicked symptoms of arsenic poisoning. Her body, preserved in a glass coffin, was a chilling reminder of the era's obsession with displaying the dead, a practice tied to fears of premature burial. Number 3. Sleeping Beauty. Sleeping Beauty's origins intertwine with medieval fears of death and curses, specifically the symbolic spindle, a tool tied to life and death. In medieval Europe, diseases like the plague could turn small wounds into death sentences, with infections spreading rapidly due to the lack of medicine. Some historians also connect the story to tales of encephalitis lethargica, a mysterious illness in the early 20th century that left sufferers in a catatonic state for years. The kingdom's fall began when Carabosse, an exiled court alchemist, returned to seek revenge. Cast out for her failed elixirs and accused of witchcraft, Carabosse was said to have cursed the royal family, using a spindle coated with a rare toxin derived from poisonous plants. On her 16th birthday, the princess encountered the spindle hidden in a tower. The prick wasn't just a wound, it was a death sentence. As the toxin entered her bloodstream, she felt a cold, creeping sensation spread through her body. Her attendants tried to help, but succumbed to the same sleep, as if the very air was poisoned. Outside, the castle was swallowed by a bramble forest. Medieval tales often spoke of haunted woods, believed to imprison cursed souls. The vines here weren't just alive, they exuded a tar-like sap that burned to the touch, trapping anyone who dared approach. The prince, likely a knight inspired by the Crusaders, fought through the brambles. As he slashed at the vines, he swore he heard screams, echoes of those who had tried and failed before him. Inside the castle, the sleeping courtiers' faces were twisted in pain. When the prince kissed the princess, she awoke, gasping for air, her eyes filled with darkness. Some versions suggest she wasn't entirely herself, her voice tinged with an unnatural echo, hinting that the curse had left a mark on her soul. Number 2. The Forest of Shadows, Hansel and Gretel. The tale of Hansel and Gretel emerged during the horrors of the Great Famine of 1315-1317. Crops failed, livestock perished, and communities descended into despair. Stories spread of families abandoning children in the wilderness, or worse, turning to cannibalism in their desperation. These dark realities haunt the backdrop of Hansel and Gretel's journey. Hansel and Gretel's father was a kind woodcutter, but their stepmother, hardened by the famine, grew ruthless. Her whispers to abandon the children began as suggestions, but soon turned into cold commands. "They'll starve anyway," she snapped. "Why not spare ourselves?" Hansel, overhearing their plan, collected white stones under the faint moonlight, their smooth surfaces glinting like lost souls in the dark. His quick thinking saved them the first time, but the second journey was different. The stepmother led them deep into the woods, beyond the reach of light or sound, into a forest where the trees whispered secrets of those who never returned. The children's hunger gnawed at their minds. Days blurred into nights. When they stumbled upon the witch's house, its candy facade shone unnaturally in the gloom. But up close, the candy smelled sour, and the air was thick with rot. The house wasn't made of sweets, but of wood, painted with the sickly sheen of decay. The witch herself was no whimsical figure. Her face was leathery, her eyes sunken, yet gleaming with an unnatural hunger. Historical echoes emerge in the witch's behavior, resembling real-life figures accused of witchcraft, who often lived isolated lives, suspected of luring children or poisoning neighbors. The witch fed Hansel morsels of meat, likely from other victims, and forced Gretel into servitude, mirroring the grim realities of child labor and exploitation. When Gretel shoved the witch into the oven, the fire roared unnaturally, the flames consuming the house with a ferocity that spoke of more than wood burning. The children escaped, clutching the witch's stolen treasures, only to find their stepmother dead. A mysterious twist that locals attributed to the witch's curse or divine punishment. Number 1. The Pied Piper of Hamelin. In 1284, The peaceful town of Hamelin, nestled in the heart of Germany, found itself under siege, not by an army, but by a relentless horde of rats. These vermin came in waves, darkening the streets, gnawing through grain stores, and even scurrying into cradles where infants cried. The town was drowning in pestilence. The desperate townsfolk gathered in the market square, begging their leaders for a solution. One fateful day, a stranger arrived. He was no ordinary man. His clothing shimmered in brilliant colors, reds, greens, and yellows, and he carried a flute slung across his chest. His eyes glinted like coins under moonlight. Introducing himself as a piper with extraordinary talents, he claimed he could rid the town of its plague for a price. Though wary of the strange man's unnerving presence, the town elders agreed to his fee, desperate for relief. The piper raised his flute to his lips and played a melody unlike any the townsfolk had ever heard. Sweet, yet unsettling, the music crept through the cobblestone streets like an invisible mist. One by one, the rats emerged, mesmerized, their red eyes glowing as they followed the sound. The piper led the writhing tide of rodents out of Hamelin, down to the banks of the Weser River. There, they plunged into the waters, drowning in droves. By nightfall, the town was free of its curse. The townsfolk rejoiced, but their gratitude quickly soured when the piper returned to collect his payment. Greed had overtaken the elders. They mocked him, offering only a fraction of the agreed sum. Some even laughed, telling him his music was nothing but a parlor trick. The piper's face darkened, his eyes narrowing, as he spoke in a voice like the hiss of wind through a graveyard. "You will regret breaking your word." That night, as the church bells tolled midnight, the piper returned. This time, his melody was different, more haunting, filled with sorrow and longing. The sound slithered into every home, slipping through cracks and keyholes, waking every child. Drawn by an irresistible pull, they rose from their beds, leaving behind toys and tearful mothers. The children, entranced, followed the piper as he marched through the streets and into the woods. The townsfolk woke to an eerie silence. When they discovered the empty beds, panic rippled through Hamelin. Parents searched the forest, their cries echoing through the trees, but there was no trace of the children. Some spoke of a cave near the Koppenberg mountain where the piper had led them, but the entrance was sealed as if swallowed by the earth itself. In the town's chronicle, a chilling entry was made. In the year 1284, 130 children were taken from Hamelin by a piper, and they were never seen again. As the curses fade into time, the kingdoms rebuild. The mirrors lose their reflections, and the shoes are locked away. But remember, the shadows never truly vanish. The whispers of the cursed spindle, the whispers of the cursed spindle, the haunting dance of the red shoes, and the dark promises made by twisted beings still linger in forgotten corners of the world.